Toby started noticing that Auntie Loma was doing things he didn't understand. This new game was nothing like the ones he played with his friends at school. Toby was only 10 years old and in primary school. He loved playing soccer and reading storybooks. However, most days, he returned to an empty house because his parents were always working. Mr. and Mrs. Zaru ran a large shop in the village market. They worked hard every day to earn money and give Toby a good life. The school bus dropped Toby off at home around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he stayed alone until 6 o'clock in the evening when his mother returned from the market. "I'm so bored staying here by myself," he complained one evening. "We're sorry, Toby. It's just for 3 hours," his mother said. "We have to work hard to pay for your school fees and other needs." Toby understood, but he still wished they had more time for him. One day, Mrs. Zaru had an idea. "Toby," she said, "why don't we ask Auntie Loma, our neighbor, to look after you until we come home?" Auntie Loma was a kind woman in her late 20s who lived next door. She was friendly and cheerful, so Toby's parents trusted her. "Okay, Mom," Toby agreed. He knew Auntie Loma well. She was always nice and often gave him little treats. From that day, Toby started staying at Auntie Loma's house after school. Her home was small but neat. She always welcomed him with a plate of food and a warm smile. "Toby, come and eat. How was school today?" she would ask. Tea first. Toby felt a little shy, but over time, he became comfortable with her. Auntie Loma was generous and playful. She bought cartoons and fun children's movies for Toby to watch. One day, she even gave him a handheld video game. "Toby, take this. It's for you," she said, smiling warmly. Toby hesitated at first but eventually accepted the gift. "Thank you, Auntie Loma," he said happily. However, things changed after that day. One Tuesday afternoon, after Toby returned from school, Auntie Loma told him about a new game. "This game is just for the two of us, Toby. Nobody else is allowed to know about it," she whispered. But Toby didn't understand the game at all. It made him feel uncomfortable. Auntie Loma made him do things that confused him. He didn't like it. "Auntie, I don't like this game," he said with a troubled look on his face. "Don't worry, Toby. With time, you'll enjoy it," she assured him. But Toby never did. The secret game became a daily routine, one that he dreaded. He started avoiding Auntie Loma's house. Some days, he stayed in school longer than usual, waiting until he had no choice but to go home. On Fridays, when school closed early, he walked slowly to delay reaching home. One evening, after yet another game session, Toby felt a strong urge to tell his parents. But he was scared. He didn't understand why he felt afraid, but he just couldn't bring himself to speak. Finally, that night, he gathered the courage to talk to his mother in the kitchen. "Mommy, I want to tell you something," he said quietly. "What is it, Toby?" Mrs. Zaru asked, sounding impatient. "It's about Auntie Lo." Before he could finish, his mother interrupted. "Toby, how many times have I called your name?" she asked with annoyance. "Your father and I work hard to give you a good life. I know we are not always home, but Auntie Loma is helping us. Don't worry, you'll get used to her, and you'll become friends." "But, Mommy, no, it's Toby," she said firmly. "Go to your room and do your homework. Don't bring this up again." "Yes, Mommy," Toby whispered sadly and walked away. That night, he sat in his room and cried. No one wanted to listen to him. He didn't understand what Auntie Loma was doing to him, and now even his parents wouldn't hear him out. But little did he know, his troubles were only beginning. The next morning, Toby woke up and found that he had wet the bed. He was shocked. He hadn't wet the bed since he was a small child, and he hadn't even drunk much water the night before. Could this be because of Auntie Loma's game? He wondered. He quickly cleaned up and changed his clothes before anyone could notice. But the bedwetting didn't stop. It kept happening every night. His parents were too busy to realize, but Toby knew something was wrong. One afternoon, after school, he went to Auntie Loma's house as usual. She greeted him with a plate of rice and juice. But when she tried to play her secret game again, Toby stopped her. "Auntie, I don't like your game. It's making me wet my bed every day. I don't feel good," he said. Auntie Loma's expression changed. She paused for a moment as if thinking deeply. Then she smiled and moved closer to him. "Don't worry, Toby. It's normal for boys your age to bed wet. You'll get over it." But Toby wasn't comforted at all. Since this new game started, he always felt anxious. Every time he stepped into Auntie Loma's house, his heart raced, and he felt uneasy. He wished his parents would come home earlier so he wouldn't have to stay with her anymore. Soon, his troubles started affecting his school life. Toby, who was once one of the brightest students, could no longer concentrate. He didn't enjoy playing like before. While his friends ran around during break time, he sat in a corner, lost in thought. His class teacher, Mrs. Nira, noticed. She was a kind and observant woman, loved by all her students. She could always tell when something was wrong with a child, and now she could see that something was deeply troubling Toby. Mrs. Nira had been watching Toby for a while and knew something was wrong. He used to be a cheerful and playful boy, but now he was mostly quiet and absent-minded. One day, after teaching her lesson, she asked Toby to stay behind. "Toby, is everything okay? You seem lost these past few days," she asked gently. Toby stood in front of her desk, his head bowed in shame. He wanted to speak, but the words felt too heavy to say. "No, ma'am. Everything is fine," Toby lied. Mrs. Nira studied him for a moment. "Toby," she said kindly, "if you are going through something difficult, you can talk to me. I am your teacher, and I am here to help you not just with school, but with anything else too." Toby didn't respond. Eventually, Mrs. Nira dismissed him, but she was sure of one thing: Toby was hiding something. And whatever it was big enough to scare him into silence. That evening, as Toby walked home, he silently prayed that his parents would be home, so he wouldn't have to go to Auntie Loma's house. But when he arrived, nothing had changed. His parents were still at work, and he had to stay with Auntie Loma. As usual, she played her secret game. But this time, something different happened. Toby noticed that his body reacted in a way that frightened him. He didn't understand what was happening, and fear filled his heart. That night, he made a decision: he had to tell Mrs. Nira. The next day, after class, he walked straight to Mrs. Nira's desk. With his head lowered in embarrassment, he spoke. "Auntie, I have something to tell you," he said softly. Mrs. Nira leaned closer, giving him a serious and reassuring look. Toby glanced around nervously to make sure no one else was listening. Then, he whispered, "It's Auntie Loma, our neighbor. She does things to me and makes me do things I don't understand." Mrs. Nira was shocked, but stayed calm. She listened carefully as Toby told her everything. "Toby, you have done the right thing by telling me," she said with a hopeful look. "You don't have to feel bad, my boy. No one should go through what you have experienced. Don't worry, I will do everything in my power to help you." For the first time in weeks, Toby felt relieved. Someone had finally listened to him. But he was also scared. What would Auntie Loma do when she found out? Mrs. Nira immediately reported the matter to the headmistress and the school board. They all agreed that the situation was serious and needed urgent action. The school called Mr. and Mrs. Zaru to come in the next day for an important meeting. When Toby's parents arrived at the school, they were worried. Did Toby do something wrong? Mrs. Zaru asked anxiously as she sat in the headmistress's office. "No, ma'am. Please have a seat," the headmistress said. "What we are about to discuss is very serious." She took a deep breath before continuing. "Mr. and Mrs. Zaru, your son has told us something very troubling about your neighbor, Auntie Loma. He said that she touches him inappropriately every day. Were you aware of this?" "What?" Mr. Zaru shouted as he jumped up from his seat, his fists clenched. Mrs. Zaru was speechless. Her hands trembled as she turned to look at her son. Mrs. Nira then explained everything Toby had told her. After much discussion, Mr. Zaru finally agreed not to take matters into his own hands, but to report the case to the right authorities. That day, when school ended, Mrs. Zaru came personally to pick up Toby. As they walked home, she held his hand tightly. "Toby, I am so sorry for not listening to you when you tried to tell me," she said with tears in her eyes. I was too busy with work and didn't pay attention to my own child. But don't worry, your father and I have taken care of everything. You are safe now. That evening, loud knocks sounded at Auntie Loma's door. When she opened it, she was met with the stern faces of 3 police officers. They were accompanied by Mr. Zaru, Mrs. Mira, and the headmistress. Miss Loma, you are under arrest for harming a child, one of the officers stated firmly. You must be mistaken. I have done nothing wrong. Auntie Loma protested, frozen in fear and shock. It's best you remain silent, another officer warned. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. With that, the officers placed handcuffs on her wrists and led her to their vehicle. Meanwhile, Toby stayed in his room, watching everything unfold from his window. He took a deep breath and let out a huge sigh of relief as he saw Auntie Loma being taken away. From that day on, his parents became more attentive. They took turns picking him up from school and spent more time with him at home. At school, Mrs. Mira kept a close watch on him and reminded all her students to speak up if they ever felt unsafe or needed help. However, Toby's bedwetting didn't stop immediately. A therapist assured his parents that, with time, he would recover as he healed from his trauma, and little by little, he did. Dear viewers, what lessons did you take away from this dramatic tale? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, give us a thumbs up, share it with friends, and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest updates. Thanks for watching, and stay blessed.